in the gym, we do a lot of core training to promote body control while twisting. So we do a lot of med ball, rotational slams, bucket slams, overhead slams. We do a lot of plank front raises. We do a lot of animal flow. I used to do some yoga in college, so we do a little bit of yoga, but anything that we can to make sure that their trunk is stabilized, and if their trunk is stabilized, obviously handstands and things become a little bit more easy. So we're on slide 37 right now. Also, with core training, it's important to make sure that people are stable, and that eventually results in less potential for falls and things like that. So um, certainly we have a big focus on sit-ups, V-ups. One thing to note is we don't do leg raises, back raises, and things. If we're going to work on our back stability and back strength, we'll do rocks and things like that, or holds in terms of, or we'll do like single leg knee extensions and things like that. But we don't do arch raises and things. I want to make sure that we're careful to the lower back. Anyway, slide 38. Now we transition a little bit to a different focus. Right now, not only am I concerned with training their muscles to become stronger or more powerful or endurance or whatever, I also want to train the metabolic systems that we're working at too. For instance, individuals who are working on sprints are going to be working anaerobically in their ATP PC system. So there are ways that we can uh, get those particular metabolic systems more effective as well. For example, if you're worried about things like about an 800-meter length, something that's less less than a minute long, you don't necessarily want to be working on endurance training and high duration, because that's going to be focusing on your slow glycolysis system. So for somebody who's going to run an 800 meter, what they could do is, as slide number 39 suggests, is do things like train at your 400-meter or 800-meter length, manipulate the amount of intensity in between your 400-meter sets with either slow intensity, slow jogs, and slow walks and things like that. And but that would be a different regimen for somebody who, say, for instance, wants to do long distance exercise training. So slide 40, you got to make sure that you're picking the appropriate intensity interval training for the particular athlete. For instance, our athletes in the gym are only going to be doing things from 30 seconds to a minute long, and vault is even shorter than that. So for me, I want to make sure that I'm training the ATP PC system and the fast glycolysis system, and I'm not really focused on whether or not their oxidative carbohydrate consumption and usage is necessarily it's not the thing that we're going to focus on. So we have to make sure that we pick the right metabolic demands for each sport, and then we can manipulate the mode and the type and the interval duration, all the fits, the frequency, intensity, time, and specificity of that particular of those exercise programs. We can measure the intensity of the high intensity interval training or any interval training based on percentages of your maximum heart rate. My maximum heart rate is 220 minus my age. I'm about 40 years old, so my estimated max heart rate is about 180. So I can work off percentages of 180 to achieve particular exercise intensities. And if I want to work, say, for instance, my ATP phosphocreatine system, I want to work between 90 to 80%, 90 to 98% of my maximum heart rate. If I want to work the anaerobic glycolysis system, it's going to be between 80 and 95, and 75 to 85% of that maximum heart rate is going to get me to aerobic oxidative training. So I want my guys to work between 90 to 95% of their maximum heart rate. My guys are young. It's 220 minus their age is always going to be higher than 200 beats per minute. So I want to make sure I'm careful with that. But I want to make sure that my guys are working at a pretty high intensity to make sure that we're working the ATP phosphocreatine system as opposed to oxidative training. Where are we? Exercise interval training. You can use heart rate monitors to do these things, and sometimes to teach a little kid how to do their heart rate and things like that is a little bit tedious. But what we do in the gym is we do specific specific exercises that last between 30 seconds to 1 minute at a particular intensity, and we give them appropriate rest in between. So figure 9.6 on slide 44 shows if you do want to say, for instance, start to pick a high intensity interval training mode, what would you do? Well, here's three different ones. If you want to work the aerobic oxidative system, one suggestion is do 800-meter sprints with 15 seconds rest in between. And with this particular athlete that they have graphed here, it's the same athlete who did each of these particular exercises. So you'll see in green, if that athlete did 800 meters and then with 15-second rests in between, that intensity wasn't high enough right there in order to increase the lactic acid. Therefore, at that intensity, lactic acid wasn't building up. And if that's the case, then lactic acid potentially wasn't being produced. And if that's the case, they were more likely using the aerobic oxidative slow glycolysis system where oxygen is present. So if you are trying to become a distance runner and you want to work on high intensity interval training, the suggestion is that 800 meters with a 15-second rest in between. The 15-second rest means that you're not going to be able to synthesize and recycle your ATP, and because of that, you're not going to be working the phosphocreatine system, and that's going to push the metabolic process. But if there's enough rest, if it was 800 meters with 3-minute rest or 5-minute rest, it would be enough time to go completely back to the phosphocreatine system potentially, and that would be a much more a bigger contribution to the fast glycolysis as well. But here with the 5 sets of 800 meters with that little rest, it forces the system into the slow glycolysis, and therefore the blood lactate accumulation isn't there, and that's an indicator that would be good for the aerobic oxidative system. The blue and the red lines would be more appropriate to my athletes, the athletes who are going to be doing the anaerobic glycolytic or the phosphocreatine system. So for my guys, I want to potentially do a combination of each of those things, but at the same time, my athletes are not going to do anything more than 30 seconds to a minute. And so and I also don't think that they're really great. They would be great at 400-meter runs because their running technique isn't necessarily sound. So what I would try to do is pick the appropriate one for my athletes, which would be, I think, a 200-meter run with a 2-minute rest, and they'd have to do it at a particular intensity as indicated by their heart rate. So there's 3 modes of high intensity interval training that if you want to go to the gym and you want to target each one of those particular metabolic processes, you would at least have some advice right here. So the distance of the interval, we're on slide 45 right now. The distance of the interval depends on, again, the athlete and the activity that you're trying to do. For me, if I did the 400 to 1500 meter runs, I don't think it would be appropriate for the metabolic training that my athletes need. So I would probably pick something like the 30 to 200 meters, and it says you could even go up to 400 meters, but at the same time, the running technique that my athletes have is I don't think is the same as somebody who's been on track teams for their whole life, and obviously I have a running coach that works with my boys, but at the same time I would try to keep and also the number of repetitions and impacts that my athletes have in terms of vault and floor and stuff is probably much higher than potentially other sports. So because of that, I would do something like a 200-meter option and the 200 meters with a 2-minute rest. But again, we're on slide 46. It's largely sport specific. If you have intense intervals, and maybe you need a little bit more rest, and it depends upon how the athlete recovers too. If you have a highly trained athlete, then potentially their cardiovascular response would be a little bit more efficient, and they'd be able to recover faster. On slide 47, the general rule is maybe in between your sets, you want their heart rate to get down to about less than 120 beats per minute before you start your next bout. We're on slide 49 right now. The frequency of training. Well, I really think it depends on what type of year you're in and what focus you're doing. For us to do a huge amount of running training and stuff like that, and plyometrics during season doesn't make too much sense. So typically during season, we're going to become more sport specific towards routines and things like that. So we're probably not going to do a huge amount of the weightlifting and all of the metabolic strength and stuff. We're going to focus more on muscle endurance. But during the year, during the season, during the preseason and off season, we'll probably do like 2 to 4 times a week. But if a world class runner is trying to do high intensity interval training, it's probably going to be a different story. So again, I think that you have to be willing to make sure that, and each athlete is going to be different too. So there has to be a strong sense of differentiating your strength and conditioning programs to meet the specific athlete and the specific sport that you're talking about. Um, Slide 50, it talks about continuous training. That's training with or without intervals. It's obviously going to focus on the slow glycolysis system. So for our athletes, we don't necessarily need to do that. You can vary the intensity and the heart rate that you're working at to meet the sport demands that you're trying to do. Long, slow distance training is again something that's probably necessarily not appropriate for my gymnasts, but if you are trying to have some type of safe training environment, because at the long, slow distances you're not going to tax heart rate. It's somewhat popular because the intensity is lower, so people are going to be able to enjoy it a little bit better. But if you're trying to use it as a training tool, then the faster that you're going to train, or the training that is as sport specific to the kind of racing that you're going to be doing is going to be specifically important. Fartlek training is a kind of training that varies your running speed, but without necessarily training the variation. It's not a schedule of increase percentage at a particular time and decrease potential the percentages at time. It's more whenever you want to increase speed and decrease speed. It's designed for variety and to be fun and engaging. So it could be a type of intensity training or exercise training that might be more appealing to people who, say, for instance, is trying to run the trails in the woods and not be so focused on specific exercise training goals and things like that. So interval circuit training, it's when you combine interval training and circuit training, that's hence the little hyphen in between interval and circuit. It's a dynamic system. There's flexibility, strength. It's pretty much CrossFit, and this is the new trend that everything's going towards. Utilization of parkour and even some of the ninja warrior stuff and things like that. It's a combination of interval and circuit training. And slide 54, we just talked about high intensity interval training. If you're interested in trying to do this, I mean, it's relatively simple. You have 4 to 6 sets, so you're pretty much going to run that way for 30 seconds, rest for 3 minutes, turn around and run back the way that you came for 30 seconds. The good part about that is if it's 6 sets for 30 seconds, that's 3 minutes, followed by 3 6-minute rests, that's 18 minutes. And in 21 minutes, you can get a high intensity interval training bout of exercise done. And it seems as though high intensity interval training has many of the cardiovascular effects in terms of improving heart function and lung function that slow, long-term distance running would have. I hope you guys enjoyed everything. I hope you have a good day. Take care.